What's up, everybody? It's Spencer Alessi, and this is the Esports Narrative. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 27 of the Esports Narrative. I am joined with Josh Chapman, who is at JoshChapMN on Twitter. He is the founder of Convoy, which is a private fundraising network for the esports and video games sector. Josh, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us tonight.
I appreciate it, Spencer. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So first, I'd like to get started and just do a little bit of an origin story. How did you get into the video game sector? Did you grow up with video games? Tell us a little bit about your origin story and how you got to be in this point of your career right now. Yeah,
absolutely. So I grew up overseas for most of my life. I moved every 2 years across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So spent most of my life overseas actually before coming to the States, and lived in DC a few times. And so, moving overseas a lot, I actually picked up video gaming as kind of a major pastime. I would play it with my brothers and my friends, and would also play it with my dad, which was a really fun way in which we would bond over LAN parties, playing games like Age of Empires, and played a lot of Halo, played a lot of Counter-Strike and, internet cafes in Bolivia and Costa Rica. Just always loved the competitive part of it. I've always been, very competitive, and I think that's a common trend in video games, but loved the competition and, the community that I found overseas while playing video games. I then came to the States, went to school in Chicago, then came out to New York City, and worked in investing and in finance. And then, the origins of getting into video gaming is about a year ago. I read an article about esports and was kind of reawakened to how far the industry had come, since the last time I was super involved in playing a lot of video games. And, the last couple of years, started playing Halo again, started getting back into it. And it really is like a pastime for me in a way that I kind of decompress or connect with friends. And so, when we're looking at esports, I was really intrigued. And so, I started getting to know as many people as I could in the space and reaching out to people on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and just asking people to jump on phone calls and jump on, Skype interviews just like this one. And the response rate was truly fantastic, right? I think that everybody who's been on this podcast with you, Spencer, and everybody in the industry, when you ask them, hey, can I connect with you and ask you about what you do? Esports is a super welcoming community, right? People are super helpful, and they're always down to, jump on a call and answer any questions you might have. And I was definitely a recipient of that. And so, I started working on, how I could make something that I enjoyed so much on more of a casual basis in my life, and how much, community I'd gotten out of it growing up, and started thinking about holy cow, maybe there's something here I could merge what I do every day, from a career perspective in the esports world. And so long story short is we have my team has built Convoy, which is a private fundraising network for esports and video gaming. And that's kind of where we are today.
Awesome. That's a really cool story. Now, I want to get right in and ask you about the investing side of the esports market. What are some ways to invest in the esports market that you're seeing?
So there's probably the most primary way to invest in esports today is in the private sector. So in what people would probably call the tech or startup world, right? So this is where high net worth individuals, venture capital funds, family offices, and even some strategics like, Comcast or Turner or any strategic brand or big company that you might know of, they have an investing arm, right? When I say the private side of markets, I'm comparing that to the public markets, which is, public stocks and IPOs and stuff like that, right? So if you want to invest in technology, you could either buy Apple stock in the public markets, or you could invest in the private markets and buy into, the next startup out of New York or Silicon Valley.
Gotcha. Awesome. So when we're talking about esports startups, since it is kind of a new market, how do you get a common question that I've seen in, preparing for this episode is how do I get investors to invest in my esports startup when it's such a new market or I don't have clout in the industry? What are some ways that these startups can attract investors?
Yeah, it's a great question. Every day I'm speaking with founders about this, as are many other great professionals in the industry across venture capital and angel investors that are active in the space. I think they would, have insights that I can glean from as well. But, some advice I would have just to founders is, be focused. I see way too many business plans that have, more than 7 different revenue streams that they're going to focus on. And when I ask how big their team is and they say it's, 2 people, 3 people, and they're going to have a consulting business as well as a B2B SaaS business, as well as a B2C SaaS business. And then they're going to throw conferences and they're going to build this and build that. I think that type of unfocused entrepreneurship it's a red flag, I think. So I would say focus and make sure you convey, a solid sense of we're going to do this very well, and then we're going to move to this. So that's one. And I think a couple other things would be, I think a level of professionalism, I think, is something that I'm seeing get better and better. But I think, misspelled words in presentations or emails that are way, way too casual when you're talking about asking for someone to invest $1 million into your company or, $500,000 or, there's just that level of, you're always making a first impression from the moment of first contact, right? So, nothing has to be, you don't have to always sign every email, best regards, et cetera. But, attention to detail matters, and that is starting to be read into the situation right from the start. So there's that. And then, I'd also say a lot of entrepreneurs have good ideas, but they might not have the background that's the best fit. And so it creates a harder pitch scenario, right? You might have somebody who has, for example, if I were to come to you and say I wanted to start a real estate business, the first question an investor should ask of me is saying, hey, that's a great idea, but what do you know about real estate, right? And I think that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that, they get struck by a good idea, but forget that they might not be the best person to execute it. And I think when you can marry those two things of, you have a great idea in a hot sector such as esports, and then you are the right person because of X, Y, Z, that's really interesting. That creates a very interesting investment deal. And so that's, something investors certainly look for.
Yeah. Now, what's the biggest mistake you see new investors make or new founders make?
That's a great question. Spencer. I think that I'll start on the investor side. I think a lot of investors are looking at esports as something that is primarily for young people. And while demographics are certainly skewed to the younger side, I know there's lots of data to show that people in their 30s and 40s are enjoying video games just as much. And I think that investors need to see this as more of the future versus just a hot trend. I think that the way that esports is showing the future of how people engage digitally is really something to pay attention to. And I think that studying that consumer behavior and seeing it as more than just the next wave in media or the next wave in OTT or yet just another permutation. I think that esports is tapping into something that the digital audience of this age and for the next 30 or 40 years are really at the cutting edge of. I think that the way esports communities engage with each other, interact with each other, and create communities that, maybe even traditional sports teams and people playing high school sports don't have that same sense of belonging and acceptance and community. I think there's something very special about that. And I think investors would be very smart to pay close attention to consumer behavior trends here and not just see it as just a media play. And I think it's that, but it's more, right? It's so much more. I think on the founder side, I think that many founders that I talk to are quite tired of getting in front of an investor and having to explain what esports is, right? And they never get to the point of explaining their idea. So, for example, a common analogy I use is, Spencer, if I come to you and say that I have a fintech startup idea, right, and I want to pitch you as an investor, you automatically know that I'm in the fintech space, right? You have a concept of what that is. You have a framework of this is something like payments, or this is, stocks, or this is wealth management. But in esports, it's tough on founders because they get in and they say esports and somebody thinks that they're talking about something very different. So I think founders can focus on trying to get to their story faster, but I think that it's a hard position for a founder to be in today. I'm not sure if that answers your question though.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm thinking about is there's obviously a lot of opportunity, and you alluded to a lot of that, but there's also risk too, right? What are some things that people like you, the investors, are worried about, or should be worried about, or concerned about, wary of when you're making investments in this market?
I think one of the biggest concerns today is that, yes, esports has tons of momentum, and yes, it's completely under monetized, but how much monetization is there truly going to be over the next 3 to 5 years, right? I mean, if whatever the number you want to use for the market, whether it's 700 million or $1 billion or a little over, depends on what data source and what you're including, right? Whether you include esports gambling or whether you don't, but whatever that number is, right? If it goes up 40% over the next 5 years, is that a winners take most, or is that going to be diversified, or are these numbers and projections of 40% growth over the next 3 to 5 years? Is that really underestimating what's about to happen? So I think that investors are kind of like, they think that there's only going to be 2 to 4 successful startups every year, right? I think that's a big concern, is that there'll be lots of little players, but really, if you want to talk about big companies that come out of this wave, are there really only 2 to 4? I would argue that there's more than that. I would also argue that there's a lot of great, what you would call the second base hits, like not $1 billion, but 100 million or 50 million, which for many investors is a home run. But it just depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to the biggest venture capital funds, they're looking for Uber. If you talk to the smaller ones, they're looking for a lot of the companies you've never heard of, but whose investors and founders, saw an $80 million exit as a fantastic thing. But that didn't make TechCrunch. You know what I mean? So I think that's a concern, is that the hype and the consumer behavior might not be able to be monetized fast enough to warrant such an influx of capital that people feel like it should have. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious on what your perspective is on what kind of returns investors are hoping for. And there's obviously a clear difference between investing in a team or an organization and a tech startup or a platform or a service, something you alluded to earlier. What are the kind of the returns that investors are hoping for, or what can they kind of expect from what you've seen?
Yeah, and I think it's a great question, Spencer, but it really depends on who the investor is. So if I move to the top of the market and you go to the public markets, right? If you buy Apple stock and it goes up by 10% in a calendar year, that's a pretty good stock to buy, right? If it goes up 30%, that's a home run. If you move down to private equity, what they're looking for is, that 3 to 6x return over, a 3 to 7 year holding period. So that's, let's say 3 to 5x, right? If you move down to venture capital, you then have the biggest VC funds who are making tons of bets, hoping for, a massive unicorn, right? That will return their fund. And so in that case, they're looking for 1,000% returns, not 1,000%, like 1,000x, 100x, whatever it is, right? You're looking for incredibly outsized returns for the number of bets you're making. If you move down into, smaller VC funds, they're also looking for outsized returns in the 10, 20, 50, 100x, but they might be okay with their $10 million fund returning $80 million versus, a benchmark or an Excel looking for, out of $1 billion fund, they need about 5 unicorns, right? That's kind of what they're looking for. So the last 2 groups are angel investors and family offices. Angel investors have a similar mindset, I would hope, in this space as in a VC, right? You're looking for outsized returns on these 25, 50, 100 or more checks. Family offices is a little more idiosyncratic and bespoke because family offices are, investment managers that manage the money of a wealthy individual. And so sometimes that wealthy individual wants to allocate 5, 10, 15% of their net worth to startups because they want to kind of roll the dice. And that's great, but it's so idiosyncratic. So hopefully that gives you an idea of that's how I look at the investing landscape. And esports fits best into the angel and VC space right now, generically. Mm-hmm. I think the family office is also taking a key interest, which is what you saw with who's putting the money up for the leagues like the Overwatch League and for the LCS. And that's the family office, right? It's the billionaires that are putting in their money.
That's interesting that you brought that up because that is a perfect segue into my next kind of topic is I'm sure you heard about the $35 million investment from the Hersh family into Team EnVyUs. And I'm curious because that seems like a lot for a team like that. When you talk about returns, and I talked a little bit about this with Stephen Hayes, is what return are they expecting, or what gain does that institution hope to get from that investment into Team EnVyUs from your perspective?
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's impossible to know exactly what they're looking for, but I'll break it down into 2 ways. They're either looking at it as one, a private equity investment. So that's the 3 to 5x return over 5 years, right? So if they bought a $35 million stake, let's say they bought a controlling stake for that. I'm guessing it was a controlling stake. So that puts the valuation of that, between $60 to $100 million, right? Just making up a valuation on how they're evaluating Team EnVyUs. Then at the next point, you basically have to decide, will Team EnVyUs in the next 5 years be worth what, right? And it sounds like that might be more of a private equity returns sort of approach. That said, if Team EnVyUs absolutely crushes it and they hold out for 20 years, that could turn into $1 billion company. Now, if you calculate that over, what's their annual return rate, it's different. But I would imagine that they're looking for, that 3 to 10 times return on their money over the next 5 to 8 years. I bet it's a longer term hold. I don't think this is like a flip sort of scenario. But that would be my guess if I were to guess today.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, one thing that I'm curious on as well is maybe some advice for young esports organizations. Let's say you have a team, you've got you're playing in a couple of leagues, you've got some streamers and things like that. Let's say you want to take it to the next level. From your perspective, what would maybe be some advice for looking or searching some ways to find these angels or these VCs or these family operators to acquire some investment money from to get some of your operations rolling as a team?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. I've actually spoken with quite a few of these organizations that are, super young or have a little bit of traction, all very passionate founders and owners of these orgs. And I think a couple of things. One, I would say that if you're doing under $50,000 in revenue a year, right? I would encourage every org to try and not go out to raise capital, but just focus on their business. Like focus on just hustling to land more sponsors, to get more streamers, to build their community, right? Because as many founders find out and as many investors know, capital raising is a very time-consuming endeavor. So if you're doing under $50,000 of revenue as an org today, I would recommend not trying to capital raise at all unless you have somebody just immediately available, and just focus on the org. I'm also really curious about the wave in mobile gaming. I think many people are talking about this right now, but it's super early, I think, when it comes to mobile gaming. I think we're still at the beginning of what that's going to be for consumers long term. And so I'm actually really curious about mobile esports organizations that only do mobile games, because that's an area that you can establish yourself where the big orgs today are not, right? They're not focused there, right? And that's fine, but it's really interesting strategy. And I was talking to a great org that is absolutely crushing it in a mobile game right now. And they're just the leading community authority content creation in this game, right? And this game is seeing incredible monthly traction, and their monthly active users is skyrocketing. So I think mobile gaming is really interesting. I'd probably encourage some young orgs to look where the other orgs are not, because the reality is, if you look at the big orgs today, they have the capital, right? And they dominate those games, and they will continue to, because they now have investors that want them to succeed over the next 10 years, right? And have the wallet to do so. So focus where you see franchising going, focus where there's no real leading authority, focus where Optic, Fnatic, Liquid are not, and just dominate that space, right? And I think this just kind of goes back to the entrepreneurial rule of like, find where nobody is and be the big fish in a small pond until that pond becomes a big pond. Mm-hmm. And then you're the guy. And I think that's interesting. And that's what I'd probably say to young orgs right now.
Yeah, that's really an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about it like that before. I can definitely see that mobile is definitely picking up traffic, and it just makes sense that it would.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of fascinating to me too. I'm excited to watch it unfold.
Yeah, because there's a game, Vainglory, I think is maybe the most popular, or one of the most popular online or mobile MOBAs, I guess they call them. So, and from just following it from afar, it seems to be really popular as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where else can we monetize esports? Like when you think about how we're going to continue to sustain this industry, you alluded to having to create or come up with new ideas of ways to monetize or make it more profitable. You have the traditional stuff like sponsors and advertisements and brand deals and things like that. And you have tournament winnings and stuff. But what are there any other ways that you see coming down the pipelines, or what do you kind of envision going forward of ways that maybe we can increase the output of this industry?
Yeah, I think that, I think broadcasting and media rights is going to see the strongest growth over the next few years. I think that data comes out of Newzoo that's going to go from, I forget, something like 50 million up to north of 300 million over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's going to be a huge place where, traditional media is going to pay to show this stuff because that's where the eyeballs are. So that's one. I think another thing is, premium subscriptions and around content and platforms and B2B SaaS and B2C SaaS and I think you're going to see a lot of more leagues pop up as well. I think you're going to see, franchise leagues that will originate outside of the publishers. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch, because then that's going to create a different type of power dynamic in the market. I mean, honestly, if you look at every monetization strategy across tech, the same strategy from a business standpoint sort of applies in esports as well. So it really is so many. But I think that the community is going to want to continue to have communities that are very dedicated. So I think like selling premium subscriptions to exclusive communities would be an interesting strategy. So that can be around content or around, tournament platforms that only allow the top 1,000 players to be in it. Stuff like that, where, people really like feeling special, and, if you can help them feel special or help them feel like they're getting something that not everybody is getting, there's a lot of business opportunities there. And I think that the esports community has shown that they're willing to double down on the people that they like, right? When it comes to streamers or games and the spending habits around esports audiences are sometimes just crazy to watch, but it's awesome when you think about what's about to happen. So I'm curious on the same kind of light. A tiny difference is, what do you think the esports industry needs to continue to grow and be successful? That's a big question, Spencer.
It's loaded.
It's a loaded question. It's a good one, though. I think a lot of people are thinking, a lot of people smarter than myself are thinking very thoughtfully about this. But, I think it's authenticity around the community is probably one of the most key parts of this. So I think for anyone that's going to be successful in this space has to be 1,000% authentic. And if you don't know the answer, say you don't know. If you're not sure, if somebody comes into the space, right, and they don't know who Optic is, don't fake like you know who Optic is. Those types of things is going to be key. But for the industry to grow, it's going to take a level of education, of educating those that aren't in the industry and bridging that gap. And that's something, we're trying to work on here at Convoy and having some traction and success with. And bridging that education gap is going to bring really, really smart people from other sectors to apply their knowledge and connections and networks to this space. And that's going to be critical. And then, of course, a capital infusion will continue to be good. I think that, valuations may be crazy for one thing, but be quite low for others. And I think, everybody talks about valuations just out of control, right? But that's only what they're reading, on different news wires. There are plenty of startups, plenty of companies that are raising at very normal valuations that just don't hit the press, right? Or, just don't get all the hot news about them. So I think valuations will be high for some and low for others, and it'll all kind of mellow out and work itself out.
Right.
Having faith that smart investors and smart founders can come to reasonable negotiations, sign deals, move on, build businesses. Some will fail, some will not. And that's kind of the beauty of the free market, right? Is that, I'm a huge believer in the free market and allowing it to kind of run its course, even though it's painful for many. But it kind of creates this market where anyone can work hard and rise to the top if you have something that the market wants. And I love the phrase, like, the market never lies. And so,
yeah,
if you have a bad product, like, the market's going to let you know. It doesn't matter who your family is. It doesn't matter anything. It just, if you have a bad product, the market's going to let you know. But if you have a good one, the market will reward you well. And that's exciting. So.
Now, you mentioned free market, which is an interesting concept to me in itself. How do you think competition, like when you think about the leagues like ESL and DreamHack and ECS and all these different leagues and franchises and things like that, how do you feel competition fits in there? Do you think competition is good and it should be all well and good for people or for these organizations to compete for eyeballs and viewership and sponsors? Or do you think that it would be better under a single umbrella? I had this back and forth with Wellstone on Twitter, and we were going back and forth about the competition, good or bad, and there's different perspectives to each side. I'm curious to hear what you think about competition as far as these leagues and franchises and majors go.
When you say competition, do you mean the fact that there is a locked-in number of spots, or do you mean
so for example, there's a lot of times where events will overlap, or there'll be qualifiers for one when there's still an event going on, or vice versa. And it's hard for a team to make all of the events that they would like to. So there's, in a sense, competition to be at one and not the other. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's healthy. I think overall, I think it's a healthy dynamic to have. I think around logistics, each league for, CSGO or Dota or League or Halo or any game should try to get on the same page of, hey, let's not make a team and choose which event to go to because they're overlapping on the same weekend. That would be nice, even across, different leagues and different organizers. But I think competition is healthy as a core concept. And so, if you think about it from, if one tournament is happening at the same time as another tournament, one of those tournaments is better, right? Just by law of competition. So the better one should win, the better one should continue, and because they're executing better, so that's kind of my opinion. I think that, you always want to make sure that people have a chance to enter the market, but I think you can enter the market, right? If you want to start a conference, if you want to start a tournament, if you have something to offer of value, the masses should come.
Yeah, and I hate to compare it to traditional sports, but because it is so different, but it's also very similar in a lot of regards. And I think of it kind of like the Super Bowl or the World Series. You don't see the Super Bowl and the World Series on at the same time. Now, granted, they're different seasons, different sporting events, different broadcast rights and things like that. But when you think about the majors and DreamHack and what ESL produces and IEM and things like that for Counter-Strike, they do pretty well about not overlapping those things. But you make a good point about, if we want to move the industry forward, maybe there is some sense of coordination that could happen between the major, the big events.
Yeah, which will be tough to mention in their board meetings, right? If they're thinking, who's our number one competitor and should we make it easier on them? I don't think any competitive business person is going to say, absolutely, let's make space for our competitor. But maybe there's ways that they can coordinate it and work together. But that's just kind of going to be the nature of the beast, I guess. Is kind of free market competition. People all are moving into the space. They all have different expertise, and they'll keep going.
Yeah. Now, I'd like to get to know you a little bit more with this next question.
Yeah.
What's been one of the biggest accomplishments for you so far in your career?
That's a great question. I think that one of the biggest accomplishments I've had is the transition from the world of finance to the world of being a founder in tech. I think that I have loved being able to make that transition, and a lot of people have helped me make it. No ship flies alone. So I think that I have loved making this transition, and I'm very, very proud of what my team has built with Convoy, and the fact that we are on to something pretty exciting here. And there's a vision in how we're going to be in this industry for the next 20 years. And that's very exciting for us. And I feel very proud of what my team has done. We've got several people that have been working on this, and they've been fantastic, and they've worked extremely hard for a lot of late nights. And, we've built a truly kind of grounds up sort of way of building a company from jumping on phone calls just to do informational interviews to now having an established company with, 7 live deals and investors across the US, across the Valley in New York and across Europe. And we love what we do. And that is something that I am very, very proud of, is arriving at a place where we love what we do. And that gets me excited.
Yeah, that's the ultimate goal in life. I mean, you can have all the money in the world, but if you're not happy doing what you truly enjoy, you really haven't won.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Now, if you had to give someone only one piece of advice, let's say a nephew or somebody like that came up to you and you could only give them one piece of advice about life, work, career, whatever it is, what would be that one piece of advice?
This is an ironic piece of advice given that I've been doing most of the talking on this interview, but that's kind of the nature of doing a podcast. But I would say speak with brevity. I've always found that, there's a whole listen more, but I think just speaking directly to the point and saying what you think and chopping your sentences off by a sentence or two, I have found it not only respects the other person and their time, but it also stops you from rambling, stops you from saying something you don't actually mean. It stops you from saying something that might get you in trouble. I mean, this applies across both business and life in general, but I think, the whole quick to listen, slow to speak, but I think even speaking less, I think that can really help people's business careers. It can help them in their personal life. And I've been practicing it over the last couple of years and have a long way to go, but practicing that every day.
Do you recall an instance where that's burned you?
I'm sure
not
it has.
being brief.
It's a good question. Yeah, I'm sure it has. I think that it probably burned me when maybe I was too quick to brush over some details with an investor or something. Where an investor was like, well, that's not enough information. I need a little bit more. So there are moments when you don't want to do that. But if they were like, tell me about your business model, and I said that too fast, or I didn't really give them the details that they deserved, that's probably where it's burned me. I think I'm thinking of a couple times where I probably could have done better. But that's why you pitch, over 100 investors, because you learn from each one. Yeah.
What's your favorite game to play, and what's your favorite game to watch right now?
That's a great question. My favorite game to play right now is Overwatch. I love playing Overwatch. I just think it's one of the funnest games I've played in a while. I'm a huge Halo player and was playing that mostly for the past 2 years, but jumped into Overwatch about 5 months ago, and I love it. I love to play it. Now, conversely, I actually can't stand watching Overwatch. I really don't enjoy watching it. It's pure chaos to watch. Mm-hmm. And that contributes to my mixed emotions on the league, right? A lot of people ask, what do you think of Overwatch? What do you think they're going to do? And my personal opinion is I think it's going to be really, really hard for people to watch this thing. That said, I love playing this game. It is so fun, right? There's so much strategy. There's so much interesting physics and dynamics and player chemistry that you have to get right, and you got to talk and you got to group up, and that is just really cool. But if you want to watch the mayhem that happens around Orisa when she's covering down at choke point, it's just crazy. So I don't know. So I'd probably enjoy most watching Halo highlights, just because that's kind of where I grew up with, and
nice.
Just watching somebody jump and no scope across the map. That's just wild to me. So I love it.
I grew up on Halo as well. That was kind of my first competitive game. Me and my buddies landing 8-on-8 back in high school, screaming. Yeah, that was.
I loved it.
Such fun times.
Yeah, those were literally. I remember those moments of doing LAN parties with the projector and the TV and the Xbox, and playing Halo just as much as I remember playing, basketball in the finals game at a tournament. Like they're literally right next to each other in my mind. So I think that just shows what we get out of esports and what we get out of gaming, right? And the fact that those memories are so close together, it's crazy.
Yeah, I've had a few guests on that can really relate to Halo, and I tell this story every time they're on. So if you're listening, viewers, listeners, audience, bear with me here as I retell this 30-second story. But back in the day, my friends and I would land Halo. We'd do 8-on-8, right? We'd do capture the flag on Sidewinder. And back in the day, we thought we were hardcore, so we didn't do shields. Like, it was just 100 life or whatever it was, no shields. So we're me and my buddy, opposite teams, we're sniping back and forth, like on the exact ends of the map, right? Like on the ridge on one side, the ridge on the other side, and we're sniping back and forth, and we're going back and forth, and we're super good at the time. So none of us is really making the shot, and then everything like pauses, and there's like a calm for like 10 seconds, and then I'm just like, screw it, and I jump over the rock, and I scoped in, sniped the guy, sniped my buddy on the other end of the map, and I just remember thinking, like, wow, you can jump and shoot accurately in this game. Like, it was the first time we found out that you could jump and shoot accurately. We just went hysterical. We were like, oh my gosh, that was insane. And we like ran out and like started cheering and everything. And it was like probably like 3 or 4 in the morning, It's like so crazy. But it was one of those memories that I just, when I think about it, it just like gives me goosebumps of how vividly I can remember that moment. And those are the moments that I remember. And that's what I love about esports, is like just those memories of competing and like cutthroat, and then you just make this incredible play and everyone cheers and is excited, and that's just magic.
That's awesome, man. I love it. And I've got similar stories as well. So I can totally relate. It's fantastic.
Now, one thing we'll close on kind of your advice, or from your perspective, if someone wants to learn more about esports or learn more about investing, where can someone go to learn more about that stuff? Obviously, there's Google and YouTube and stuff like that. Is that how someone can learn best? Like, what are some resources maybe for people who want to learn this industry or learn about investing and money and things like that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one, I would say that's exactly a gap in the market that Convoy and my team is trying to fill. And so we've written on the space, and there's articles that we've written, and we are, even on our site at convoy.co, you can go and look at kind of a generic breakdown across 2 pages, right? Across the founder page and across our investor page, and you can read that and hear some of our thoughts. But it's hard to do it from an esports specific perspective. There are a few people writing on this, and I know you've had Stephen Hayes on this, and he writes some great stuff on esports, so you should definitely read as well. But I think that there's a gap in the market here of what investing in esports means and the marriage of those two, and I think that there's a lot there. But if you want to learn about generic investing, which does apply in esports, I would honestly look up, how does venture capital work? I would look up what is angel investing and what's the average check size, and how should you pitch an angel investor versus a VC, because those are going to be the primary players for the foreseeable future in this space. I would then think about, how do you think about a capital raising strategy for your company if you're a founder or an entrepreneur? You don't want to sell too much of the company too early, but you've got to make sure your valuation isn't, too high or too low. And it might sound crazy to get too high a valuation, but actually, if you get too high a valuation, it puts a lot of pressure on you in the next 18 months to make sure that you increase your valuation by 4x. So imagine if you're a no revenue company who gets a $20 million valuation, that means that by the next round, you should be building a business to be worth about 80 million, if not more. That's a really, really high pressure mandate on a founder. And so I would caution people to think about the 10 to 20 year view here, where if you're a founder that raises money for a company that goes bust and everybody knows that it went bust because of something you did as the founder that was, just kind of a little too out there, that'll follow you around forever, right? You'll always be the guy that, somehow fizzled away $5 million. And I think some of the capital raises that have been going on over the summer, I really hope that they all work out. But sometimes the valuations behind companies can make you nervous because you're like, I really hope they can support that in the next round. So that's a few thoughts and advice.
Awesome. Now, where can people connect with you online?
You mentioned on Twitter, so it's Josh Chapman, Josh Chap MN. Also on LinkedIn, you can find me if you type in Convoy Esports and Josh Chapman. LinkedIn is a great one. I love using it. Great platform. You can also reach out to me at josh@convoy.co. So it's Convoy with a K. So I'm happy to get some emails. So put that on a podcast.
Awesome.
But yeah, those are the main ways.
Awesome. Josh, thank you so much for coming on the show. I got a lot of wisdom from everything you said, and I know we are just scratching the surface here, so I would love to have you on the show again, and I really appreciate you taking some time out tonight to talk with us and share your wisdom.
Absolutely, Spencer. And I think what you're doing here is fantastic. Great job, and you're really doing the industry a great service by getting these stories out there for a lot of great people you're interviewing. So great job.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me to hear that, and the feedback that I've gotten recently has been just amazing. So I appreciate that sentiment and everyone for all of their feedback and support. It's just been amazing.
Of course, man.
Awesome. And with that, I just want to remind everyone that if this all goes as planned, this show is just the beginning. Hey guys, real quick before you go, I just want to say thanks for listening and supporting the show. It really means a lot to me that you like it, and I hope that if you found some value from this podcast, that you'll share it on Twitter or on Instagram or Facebook, anywhere that you have a social media presence. I would love it if you would just share it with 3 to 4 people that might be interested in it. It would absolutely mean the world to me. It would help me get my name out there, help me get the podcast out there. I do this solely for the love of esports and for the love of getting to know people and hearing the stories of esports that I think are so awesome. So please, if you got value from this, if you enjoyed it, please share it with someone who you think might like it. And with that, I will see you next time. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. 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 I really